God keeps his promises. Faith rewarded. Genesis 21. Let's go. Yeah. The Lord visited Sarah just as he said. She bore a son, Abraham's joy spread. Isaac named laughter ahead. Promise fulfilled, God's covenant fed. Abraham 99, Sarah 90. God's word came through, miraculous, mighty. Faith in action, the impossible sight. Genesis 21, God does what's right. Circumcision and celebration. On the 8th day, Isaac was circumcised. God's covenant symbol, faith emphasized. Abraham obeyed, his trust realized. Righteousness shines where obedience lies. Sarah said, God brought laughter in my life. Joy overcoming years of strife. Even in old age, hope is rife. God's promise fulfilled. 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 Yeah. God's promise fulfilled. 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 Yeah. God's promise fulfilled. Yeah. God's promise fulfilled. Isaac is born. Faith rewarded, a new life sworn. Genesis 21, joy in the morn. Blessings rise and covenant adorn. God's promise fulfilled, laughter and cheer. Faith in the impossible, God's hand near. Abraham and Sarah, hope crystal clear. Covenant alive, his word sincere. Yeah, but Sarah saw Ishmael mocking her son. She said, send him away, let God's will be done. Abraham distressed, worried, undone. God said, don't fear, I'll make a nation from him, my son. Hagar wandered, despair in the wilderness. But God heard the boy, answered their distress. Water from heaven, mercy and bless. Ishmael's life secured, God's care expressed. The reflection, Genesis 21 shows faith and trust. God's timing perfect, his word robust. Even in difficulty, his mercy just. He fulfills promises, righteous and just. Isaac born, laughter restored. Hagar and Ishmael under God's accord. Faithful obedience, blessings poured. Covenant living, God's promise stored. Isaac born, Hagar cared for. God keeps his word, promise evermore. Genesis 21, faith at the core. Covenant alive, blessings soar. God's promise fulfilled. God's promise fulfilled. God's promise fulfilled. God's promise fulfilled. God's promise fulfilled.